Well, sir, this is Sam Yoder. I found that fascinating. It is not very often that we get the opportunity to hear from diverse perspectives about our mission, right? We have a mission to use our nuclear capability as strategic deterrence in the world, and so it's very fascinating to hear your perspective. So hopefully we can get a lot more questions going right now.
By the way, you're not getting graded. There, I mean, they always say there are no stupid questions. Well, but there are no wrong questions.
So one question is, what do you mean when you say that perhaps our strategy could be to go for the head?
Well, I think you've got to be able to make sure that their ability to command, control, and communicate, um, not only in space but on the ground, is held at risk. And to the extent that they increasingly, certainly Chinese, are relying on space just like we do, you're going to have to be able to disable or dazzle systems located in space. I think more generally, if you look at information warfare and new generation warfare, you really want to threaten the ability of the command structure, not only to command the troops, but for the political system, let's say in Beijing, to have worries about being able to maintain control over its provinces. Or, roughly, the INF strategy, once we found out where the theater command systems were, and we did because we got a defector tell us. Once the Russians knew that that was the case, they immediately sued for getting rid of the missiles because they were afraid not only of losing control over their military, but of losing control over the Soviet Union. We need to be playing that game. That is the game we have a fighting chance to get the upper hand on. I know everyone has become very cynical about American politics, and there's plenty to be cynical about. But I have to tell you, the good news is we yell and scream at one another. We have, very extreme political views compared to, let's say, the 1950s, I suppose. But we get on. These other places are very fragile, and the amount of dissent and yelling and screaming they can tolerate is far less than us. We need to take strength in that and leverage it. I don't know that we're doing that quite yet, but we could.
Another question, sir. With the war in Ukraine and the perceived weakness and age of Russia's conventional weapons, how has that changed our nation's perception of the effectiveness of their nuclear weapon capabilities?
Well, I think if you want to defend Ukraine, it doesn't. If you're hesitant, you worry that the World War III will start if we give X system or Y system to the Ukrainians. That's a long way of saying it's a worry. I don't know how to gauge it. And it depends much more on our perception than reality or their perception. After all, the command and control over those weapons is almost entirely in the hands of one man. I think even much more so than it is the case in the US. And certainly, any of the strategic writings or doctrines can easily be pushed to the wayside if Mr. Putin has a bad day. So you got to worry about it. But what's very reassuring, if you want to be an upbeat optimist, is you'd think they would have used them by now. I mean, they are not doing very well in this war. They have not used them. I think they've talked about it a great deal, and mostly that. So I don't know. That's a lousy answer, but that's, I think, about the best one I can give.
All right, here's our next. Are the communications command and control hardened in mainland China? Does the U.S. need to do more to protect our communication lines? And how does the U.S. compare with China in protection?
I don't know the answer to the latter, but it's good that it's a proper question, and it is the question that smart people who want to prevail need to get the answer to. So it's a we say a good question is worth 10 times a good answer. Uh, so if we walk away only with thinking that that's a good question we need to focus on, it's been a pretty good lecture period. Uh, that's a long way of saying I don't know what the answer is to that. With regard to the hardening, yeah, we need to work on that. Oh my God. I think we can do a lot more and need to do a lot more. And certainly the Livermore people think that as well. And I think they're right. Um, I do think that the Chinese have certain vulnerabilities in their system. I again don't hold my clearances, so it's more on the basis of things I've heard from people who do. Um, we need to work them, and we certainly need to say that that's something that we're interested in going after, particularly making it clear to them that it won't stop just at military command. And they have to be worried that they could lose the whole ball of wax if they engage in really bad behavior outside of their borders. Now, of course, they can do that to us. One of the things that we could have an advantage in, and I've written about this, one of the great things about COVID is everyone now in the summer who's from New York is out in, Ensign, Montana, fly fishing. Some of them are buying, summer homes. Flyover country took a hit. Well, if you disperse more of what your financial, political, military capital is around this country, we do have a political system that can kind of work and at various levels, even if the worst happens and, the capital's hit. We need to kind of think about that and sort of not be ashamed of that comparative advantage, because it is not the case in China or Russia. They are highly urbanized places. I don't know if that helps.
Thank you, sir. And I really appreciate your perspective that a great question is half the answer. So that is a culture that we try and build here in our community. So follow-on question is kind of to do with what you just said. Do you think the
Yeah.
World War II and Desert Storm thinking of knocking out critical infrastructure still applies versus just military targeting and city targeting? Have we overlooked
Yeah,
this in our planning?
that also is a great question, and it's got to be a great question because I'm arguing that the answer is infrastructure targeting is coming back. And we can see this in a ham-fisted way by Putin's targeting of the electrical supply system and a number of other things in Ukraine. A lot of Chinese and North Koreans and Iranians are physically in that country taking notes. What they come up with as what they will target against Taiwan and South Korea and other places is surely something we need to be, pondering. I know it's something I'm going to focus some of my research on. And I think the problem is that you can use precise weapons to knock out infrastructure to try to demoralize the populace and try to prevent a country from having the will to resist. Now, what's interesting is in the case of Ukraine, one of the most important intelligence failures, probably of the post Cold War period, is our assumption, along with the Russians, that the Ukrainians were not a serious nation and would collapse on short notice, and that we needed to get airfare for Zelensky out of Kyiv. Boy, did we get that wrong. So I don't know how this works, but I think it's got to be factored in to future warfare planning, and I don't think it has been. I think what we've done with our targeting is try to figure out how to knock out, let's say, the entire electrical supply system of the country, rather than trying to, like a single integrated operating plan, rather than figuring out, well, what nodes, if you hit, would have what political or military consequences if you didn't knock the whole thing out. I think that level of target research is, it needs some tough love. I don't know if we've embraced it. I think what we've done is say, well, here's what you need to knock out everything. If you want to knock out less, well, it's a lesser included problem set. So, tell me what you want and I'll do it. I think you got to do more analysis than that. I think you actually should be looking at the smaller options and what they might supply or what kind of challenges they present.
Well, sir, on behalf of Minuteman III Systems Directorate, we are so grateful that you gave us this time and shared your expertise and your perspectives, and you've given us a lot to think and talk about in our hallways. And thank you.
Well, if any of you have any questions or comments, I'll even take favorable comments. There is an email. It's Henry at N for nuclear policy, all one word, .org. And there is a website. And that website is nuclearpolicy.org. And if you want to get the research, every week I do clippings of what I think will be useful for my center's research. I share publications I've commissioned. And if you want to get on that list, it's pretty easy. You just have to contact me. That's it.
Excellent. Well, thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Lots of
Bye-bye.
compliments in the chat.
Okay, well, save them. You need them.